much for watching us on YouTube this morning.
Make sure you stay tuned because you're going to hear a message this morning that helps you know Jesus better.
But maybe give you a little bit of a recap as to where we're at here. We kicked off a series last week, and it's called Better Not Call Saul. And what we're doing is we're looking at the first king of Israel and his life, and is a man named Saul. And he was a man for all intents and purposes, that he was the king that the people wanted, but he was not the king that they needed. And what we'll do as we look at his story, we're going to discover that to be true even as early as this morning. But before we get there, just looking back, it started. Saul's kingdom started last week with the request of the people to Samuel the prophet. The people of Israel, they go to Samuel the prophet and they say, Samuel, will you give us a king so that we can be like the other nations? God responds to that request by essentially saying, hey, your request is a complete rejection of me and my authority over their lives. But the people would not let go, they would not relent, and they were persistent in their request. And so what ends up happening is God begins this journey to bring Saul to his place as king of Israel. And what we're going to see is that his way to the throne comes in one of the most unlikely ways. Even if you look at it and you look at this text and you consider it, honestly, like it feels almost just so many coincidental things happen. And so as I was thinking about that, I posted in our group on Facebook, the New Life Community Life group, and I said, does anyone have any examples of coincidences that happened in your life that you'd be willing to share that I may or may not use on Sunday morning? And we had 40 people comment, and so we had several. I can't use all 40 of them, or that would be all we would do. But these are a few that came that were just coincidences that as you zoom out, you can kind of see what God was doing here. This person's from Natalia Lynn, and she said this. She said, I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for. It is. That's why we're using it. I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for. I joined Chi Alpha, a college ministry, because I thought it was a sorority without any dues. All the ladies said, amen! And I ended up getting saved through it during my sophomore year of college, and now I serve as a missionary with Chi Alpha Campus Ministries. That's pretty cool. All right, next one here. Jamie Popejoy. God intervened at the river. I just think that's a good sentence, right? Like God, I don't know, maybe that's a book or something or a movie. I don't know if I'd watch the movie, but God intervened at the river. I met a lady. 2 hours later, we were talking about healthcare and how I wanted to transition back to it. 2 weeks later, I was hired at Mercy. We both love sharing that story because we know it was God who brought us together in a little river in Galena that summer. We're known as river rats here. All right, then this one's from Bob Caldwell. He said this, a friend with an AG missions agency asked to meet with me to practice his new fundraising pitch. Like, my answer to those meetings are always no. like, oh yeah, I'd love to. Oh no, something just came up, I can't. But Bob did, and when he explained what Network 21 did in internet evangelism, I got so excited that I blew up his presentation by asking question after question. 3 weeks later, I was hired by them and filling out my paperwork to become a missionary. That had never been on my radar, and now I've been there for almost 8.5 years. This one's from Katie Erickson. She said, when I was 11 weeks pregnant with Joey, who's now 5, a nurse did an impromptu ultrasound just for fun. Like what? Who does that? It'd be fun, an ultrasound. But whatever. 2 weeks later, I was having surgery to remove what turned out to be ovarian cancer. Even another 2 weeks would have been too late to operate safely around the baby. Just so happened. This last one's funny. All right. Olivia, Ryan. I went into Price Cutter to get brownie mix, and I got a husband. Yeah, you never know. I shop at Price Cutter too. I like what Sammy said. I guess I need to shop at Price Cutter more. And you just don't know. Like you look at, it's kind of funny, but we all have those moments in our lives, right, where we zoom out and it seemed coincidental, seemed like it wasn't that big of a thing. And then as we zoom out, we see that God was clearly doing something. And even like, I think of those stories, I think of stories like that in my life, and I just think, man, I'm so glad that this happened, because if this wouldn't have happened, then, well, that wouldn't have happened. And in the story we're going to look at this morning, I would say that if Saul was in the New Life Community Facebook group, like this is the story that he would tell. And you see it in 1 Samuel chapter 9, and we'll start in verse 1. Verse 1 really introduces us to him, but you'll see the point in verse 3. It says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechereth, son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. Don't you love it when you feel like the Bible's talking about you? From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Verse 3, this is when it kind of gets just almost coincidental. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to Saul his son, take one of the young men with you and arise. Go and look for the donkeys. Chapter 8. The people ask for a king. They say, we want a king like the other nations. Chapter 9, we meet the king, Saul. And what is the first thing that we see him do? We see him do something that kings don't do, which is look for donkeys. Because I can tell you this, that if you're a king, you're not looking for your donkeys. But here we meet him. His dad just so happens to lose his donkeys, and now Saul is in pursuit of donkeys. Now, what's interesting is that, as we'll see as we continue to look through the text, his pursuit of the donkeys leads him to the throne. But it started with him randomly pursuing donkeys that his father had lost. But hey, we are in a series right now that we're calling Better Not Call Saul. And we are looking at the life of Israel's first king, a man by the name of Saul. And maybe you've missed a couple weeks, or maybe this is your first week with us. I'll just kind of catch you up to the story so that you know what we're talking about. That we meet Saul, or we meet the idea of Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 8. Okay, and in 1 Samuel chapter 8, what happens is Israel is in peacetime. Things are going really well for them. And when things are going well, what we tend to do is we want to hold on to the good things that are around us. So in their attempt to hold on to the good things that are around us, what they do is they approach a man named Samuel, Israel's prophet, leader, judge at the time, and they say, Samuel, give us a king so that we can be like the other nations. Now, what we know is because from the context and from what God says in response to their ask is that phrase, I want a king like the other nations, was a very troubling phrase, because what they were saying in saying that is they were saying, God, we no longer want to be your covenant people. That God, more important than following you is that we would really rather just kind of do our own thing. And we know that because God speaks through Samuel and says, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. So that's how kind of the idea of Saul comes. The people ask for a king, and then in their asking for a king, we meet the one in 1 Samuel chapter 9. And he's a man named Saul. And what we know about Saul up until this point is that Saul is a guy, man, who looks good. Like, he is a guy who has all of the features externally that you would want a king to have. Like, Saul is the person that when he walks in a room, you just look and you're like, man, that guy looks like a king. Like, he was that dude. But as impressive as he was on the outside, what we're discovering is that he was equally unimpressive internally. And his lack of internal characteristics, what we're going to find is that those lack of internal characteristics are going to keep the people of Israel from experiencing the faith and grace of God in this moment. But so we're at this moment where Saul's been chosen, him and Samuel have interacted. Samuel has told Saul, I am going to make you the king of Israel. And then we come to this moment in 1 Samuel chapter 10, where It is the coronation of a king. Like, this is the moment where Saul goes from being a wealthy man's son to the first king of Israel. And when you think about these moments, like these coronation moments, you think of a lot of pomp and circumstance, right? Anytime you've ever been to something, and I know that we're not England, so we don't have a lot of that happening, but anytime someone experiences a new office, there's always just this sense of just kind of pomp and circumstance that goes with the moment. I was thinking about when I got ordained. And it was a moment where I walked into a new office, and I remember coming forward for prayer, and I gave a guy my Bible, and he opened it up and read it to me and handed it back to me. And then he put this sash on my shoulders, and if you were curious what that sash looks like, I have a picture of it. Cassidy, he wore it in my office this week. He won a contest, and so we got to wear my sash. So that's just how it was. But it was this moment where it's like, okay, like there's all this happening. I think about that. I think of also, I mean, we experienced this recently with the inauguration of President Biden. Like, there's all this pomp and circumstance and a lot of speeches and this moment where someone is taking a new office, like that happens. If you've seen the Netflix show The Crown, maybe some of you remember when Queen Elizabeth got that moment. I haven't seen season 2. I just like season 1. I wasn't interested in season 2, but like she became the queen, and it was this big deal. There's all this emotion and all these things happening in this moment. But I think we can all agree that there's one coronation that resonates with all of us more than all the others, right? It's a coronation that I don't assume that any of you would forget. When Simba was told that he would be king, right? You've got Rafiki holding him up, all the animals bowing, and the circle of life blaring in the background. Like that is what you think of when you think of like someone rising to prominence. Like, and I say all that to kind of set the stage. Okay, like when these moments happen, this is what you expect. Like you expect speeches and people saying things they don't mean and all that kind of things that make you feel good on the inside. And then Saul becomes king. And really, when Saul becomes king, you see them replace the pomp and circumstance with judgment and regret. Look at this in verse 17. It says this. It says, "Now Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah. And he said to the people of Israel, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt. I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, from the hand of all the kingdoms that were oppressing you. But today you have rejected your God who saves you from all your calamities and your distresses, and you have said to him, set a king before us.'" There is no Elton John music playing in the background while he's talking. This is not what you expect when you are going to make someone a king. That this isn't the setting that you would anticipate in a moment like that. And what's so interesting is the people who are gathered together, they don't know what they were gathered together for. That right now there's only two people that know that Saul's going to be king. That it is Samuel and it is Saul. So for all they know is that Samuel gathered the people together for something. And he kicks this off by saying, "You asked for a king, and you have no idea what you asked for." If you remember in chapter 8, the reason why they said they wanted a king was because they wanted someone who would fight their battles for them. They wanted someone who would go out before them and who was able to fight and keep them safe. And what Samuel is telling them is he's saying, you already had that. He points them back to their history, a story that everyone there who would have been gathered would have been familiar with. He points them to this story and he says, you remember Egypt, right? This nation was a nation of slaves, and if it wasn't for the hand of God, this would still be a nation of slaves. But God delivered you, and you want to abandon him. And then he reminds them here, he says, this land that is yours. How did you get it? You got it because God went before you and delivered you from the hand of all of your enemies. That this land is only yours because there is a God in heaven who has fought for you. And you are saying to the God in heaven, you know what, I'd rather have a king. You know what, I'd probably rather have a man that I can control rather than having a God that can tell me what to do. And in their pursuit of something, they rejected God. And this is something that we do. Like we forget the things that God has done for us sometimes when things are going well, because we forget who gave us that ability. And then sometimes when things are going poorly, we forget because we just think, well, he's never been good to me because I'm in this situation that I'm in. And the people of Israel could have argued both of those ways in that moment. But in 1 Samuel chapter 8, what's happening is they're in a season of peace. And so their thought is, we don't want to lose this peace. So let's make a king so that we can continue to be peaceful. And now here we are in chapter 10, and what we see is the peace is starting to fade. That we learned last week that there are Philistines, their enemies, that are camped out on the hill of God waiting to attack God's people. And so now they're at this season where things aren't going well, and they're like thinking, so surely now we need a king. And here's what happens to us in those moments when things are good or when things are bad. We're always tempted in those moments to love the gift more than we love the giver. That the people of Israel, they loved peace and security more than they loved the God who gave it. And for all of us, that's the question that we've got to ask ourselves in the seasons of our lives. Do you want God's favor and his blessing? Like, do you want to walk with him even if it's going to be hard? Or would you rather just have things easy and go the way you want? They would have chosen an easy life where things just gone where they want. And so they forgot the God who brought them to the place that they are. And because they forgot, this is how they are addressed. And what this does to us is it causes us to look at our lives and say, are there times where God has been faithful that I have just not been disciplined in remembering those things? Are there circumstances in my life where I'm in a really good place and I'm ignoring the person who put me there? Because that's what happened. And it's very easy for us when push comes to shove to pursue the gifts more than we pursue the givers or the giver. So we have to ask ourselves, well, is this something that we're willing to do? This is where Israel's at. And what's so interesting, again, is no one here knows what's going to happen except for Saul and Samuel. They've been brought together, and what we're getting ready to see happen next is a circumstance that only happens 3 times in Scripture. And the other 2 times it happens, someone is killed at the end, okay? So it's very interesting. And the people who would have been here, who would have been gathered, they would have been well aware of the first circumstance. That the first time this happened, it happened in Joshua chapter 7, and it happened with a man named Achan. And what he did was he stole things he wasn't supposed to steal, and so God wanted to figure out who it was, and he used this to discover Achan, and at the end of this process, Achan's dead. So the people have no idea what's going on, and then Samuel tells them this, and it's very interesting. Look at this. Verse 19. It says, now therefore. Now, when you see the word therefore in the Bible, you got to ask yourself, what is it there for? That it is there because the people of Israel asked for a king, and in asking for a king, they rejected God. So he's saying, now, because you have rejected God, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands. And then Samuel brought all the tribes near. And the tribe of Benjamin was taken by Lot. And he brought the tribe of Benjamin near by its clans, and the clans of the Matrites were taken by Lot. And Saul, the son of Kish, was taken by Lot, but when they sought him, he could not be found. Now it's interesting because the people who are gathered are probably aware of the situation with Achan. And with every lot that is cast, especially if you're a Benjamite, you're thinking, uh-oh, I'm gonna be punished for asking for a king. Oh man, God is gonna hold me. Oh no. But there's one person there who knows what's not going to happen. He knows it's not going to happen, and it's Saul. Samuel has already anointed him. He's already told him, hey, you're king. You're the one. The one that's asked for is now going to be the king. Saul, you're the one. And as the lots are cast, the one person there who probably wouldn't have been scared is nowhere to be found. And as you figure out what he was doing, remember how he was the king they wanted, but not the one they needed? The more we look at what he was doing, the more that just becomes glaringly obvious. Look at this in verse 22. So they can't find him. Like the lot is cast for Saul, and everyone's like, what's going on? And they inquired again of the Lord, is there a man still to come? And the Lord said, behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage. And they ran and took him from there. The king that they asked for, the king who was to fight their battles for him, that person who's getting ready to be anointed king, his moment of his coronation. Where is he? Thus says the Lord, he's hiding amongst the baggage. He's nowhere to be found. I mean, if you're Samuel, like you probably feel really justified actually, but if you're thinking, this is what you asked for. You had a God who fought for you. You had a God who delivered you from your oppressors in Egypt and gave you the land that is yours. And you still insisted on having a king. And now in the moment when he is supposed to take the throne, he is nowhere to be found. And he's the only one there other than Samuel that knew what was going to happen. And so, that's the moment. That's what's happening. That's what we're all feeling, okay? Which makes what happens next seem so incredibly strange. That even as I've been just kind of processing through this text this week, this part is the part that I'm just like, how in the world is this what happens? Look at this. And when he stood among the people, Saul, he was taller than any of the people from the shoulders upward. Remember, he's the only person, the only Israelite in the Old Testament whose height is ever mentioned. It's always only mentioned talking about the enemies. The point is that he is an impressive-looking person, so important that Samuel is reminding us again that he's tall. And Samuel said to the people, I just imagine this has got to be sarcastic. Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? There's none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king. Like, his internal displays, the fact that he's the one they want and not the one they need, this is on display for all the people to see. And yet they see him and they're like, yep, that's it. That's what we want. Could you just imagine what would happen if that happened at an inauguration? I mean, really, all right, the president is getting up to give their speech. I thought it was weird, that chair. I just figured maybe they were going to do something like he was going to come down from a helicopter or something. But nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found in their moment when there's, like, could you imagine, like, how much people would freak out? Like, even if it was your party's person, like, you would be like, yeah, I don't know. Like, that's exactly what Saul did. But the second they lay eyes on him, they forget all of the internal problems that would have been on display. And they say, well, he looks like a king, so surely he'd be a good king. And I'll tell you, this is what people do. So what this text does, it turns the mirror on us. And it forces us to ask the question, man, are we so easily deceived by what we see? Because I can tell you, people are. I mean, naturally, if you look at studies, do you know that in the last 100 years, the taller person has won the presidency 75% of the time? I mean, that's a lot. As far as people go, there's something about things that look a certain way that deceive them. I mean, think about Ted Bundy. Like, even after he killed all those people continued to write him letters while he was in prison because he looked good. Like, there's something about things that we can see that cause us to miss what's really happening on the inside. It happens with the relationships. But we can be drawn to people with charisma with no character. Man, they're fun. They make me feel stupid, but man, they're fun. When I'm around them, I look cooler because I'm in their presence. Yeah, they're like, we're drawn to that. And we see that here in the text. But not only do we see that, but it also kind of causes us to ask ourselves, okay, so when I think about developing myself, am I committed to developing internal qualities? Or is it just things that are external that I'm concerned about? Am I putting in the time internally, or is it just externally because I want to look good? We have that inside of us. And you also see here in the text something that none of us would want to admit because it's true, and it's that we're stubborn. That people are stubborn. They have no reason to believe that Saul would be a good king. But you see present in the text that they are far more concerned about having a king than having the right king. And you see that in their ability to hold on to this moment, even though it's really awkward. I mean, think of it from the perspective of their nation. That this is Israel's history, and we're talking about their first king and how when he was chosen, he was hiding because he was scared. Lin-Manuel is not doing a musical about that. And so you have this. We're stubborn. And here's something that's so interesting with the text, okay? I had him highlight this. The people shouted, "Long live the king." You know what's interesting about that? That is the first time in this whole narrative that Saul's been called king. Notice who called him it. It wasn't Samuel, wasn't God. It was the people. Because they're stubborn. Saul and God, they had all the information, so they just kept calling him a ruler and a prince. But when the people see him, long live the king. So as you zoom out, and you kind of, I don't know, put yourself in God's shoes. Like, what do? You think, man, there's got to be a better tribe somewhere, right? I mean, you've got these people whom you have delivered, whom you have protected, whom you have given land, who says, I'd rather have a king that was hiding in the baggage than to have God be my king. If there was a moment to wipe your hands of these people, now is that moment. There was a moment to say, okay, we're going to move on. We'll be done. This is the moment. But what you see God do is so incredibly gracious. that it doesn't make sense. But it shows how committed he is to keep them his people. Look at this in verse 25. They said, "Long live the king." And then Samuel told the people the rights and duties of kingship. And he wrote them in a book and laid them up before the Lord. So this is the grace of God. But if you remember 1 Samuel 8, what happened there was Samuel's like, okay, if you want a king, here's what you can count on. They're going to take advantage of you. Here's what you can count on. If you want a king, they're going to exploit your family. If you want a king, hey, you think the grass is greener on the other side. It's actually greener where you water it. Like he walks it through. He's like, you say you want a king, but you don't understand. And then here you have Samuel say, okay, long live the king. And you have him say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the rights and duties of kingship. And most commentators believe that this is based on Deuteronomy chapter 17, when Moses wrote, hey, when there is a king in Israel, this is how they're to behave. Look at this in Deuteronomy 17. Talking about the king. He may not acquire horses for himself or cause other people to return to Egypt to acquire many horses. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Nor shall he acquire for himself excess silver or gold. And when he sits on the throne, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. What's happening is God's like, okay, you want a king like the other nations? He's saying, I love you too much to let that happen. That where other kings are going to exploit you, where other kings are going to be more concerned about their legacy than doing what's right, I'm going to give you a king that's going to submit to my rules. That I'm going to give you a king that is going to have to follow me before he leads you. I know you say you want one like the other nations, but instead of doing that, I'm going to give you something better. I'm going to give you my kind of king. I love the way that John Woodhouse in his commentary on 1 Samuel describes it. This is what happened here. Is God outmaneuvered his people. So you want a king like the other nations? All right, I'm going to give you a king, but I'm going to give you one that's better. I'm going to give you a king that's governed by a higher rule and authority, because here's the thing. You're my people, and I love you too much to let you be exploited. So he puts everything in place for them. And you see it. Like you see it as the story winds down. Here in verses 25 through 27. Look at this. It says, then Samuel sent all the people away, each one to his own home. And Saul also went home at Gibeah. And with him went men of valor whose hearts God had touched. But some worthless fellows said, how can this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no present. But he held his peace. Now, those worthless fellows, some people think that might have been in response to him hiding amongst the baggage. I don't know if that's true or not, because that word worthless, it's the same word that's used earlier on in 1 Samuel, talking about Eli's sons. And the idea there is that they're just no good people. That doesn't matter what would have happened. They would have opposed the king, whether it would have gone well or not. But really, that's not important. What's important as you consider this text is that the king of Israel went home. Just think about this. On his inauguration day, where he became the supreme ruler of the people of Israel, the most important person in the land, the prophet says, now all the people need to go home. And the people go home, and so does the king. So I would just ask you, who's in charge? What God's doing is he's saying, I'm in charge. I'm going to lead the people my way. And it's so incredibly gracious when you think about it. Because as you look at this text, you have the foolishness and the internal struggles of Saul. You have the foolishness of the people asking for something that was in no way good for them. But then you have juxtaposed to that, you have this incredible grace and favor of God that says, as wrong as my people are, I'm going to be committed to give them better than they can deserve. And that's our text. That's what we see. And so as we turn the mirror on us as we close this morning, I just would like us to consider 3 questions kind of to take home, to ask ourselves as we evaluate where we are spiritually and how we respond. And the first question you have to ask yourself is, am I avoiding something God is asking me to do? And here's the thing. Saul, given his moment, given his opportunity, that Saul, he was hiding amongst the baggage. That instead of doing what God had called him to do, what he was supposed to do, he was hiding. And so I would just ask you, are there things in your life where as you look at those things in your life, the reality is that you know what God wants you to do, but you have chosen to do the opposite? And only you can answer. It could be all kinds of things. It could be a person that you need to forgive. It could be an issue of faithfulness or obedience. It could be something that in God's word you know that you're supposed to do, but every time you hear it, you say, nah, that's not for me. That it could be something very specific that only you know, but the reality of that circumstance is that you know that God has spoken to you on that issue, but you just continue to tell him no. That this text forces us to look at our lives and say, okay, do I really trust him to do what he asks me? Saul didn't, and we're going to see what's going to happen. It's going to be tragic. And the same thing is true for us, is that when we look at God's word to us and we respond like Saul, inevitably what will happen to us will be just as tragic. The second question you have to ask yourself is, am I being deceived by something that I see? Am I being deceived by something that I see? Or even am I too concerned with making things look good when there's all kinds of internal problems that I have on the inside? That the people had every reason to be like, when Saul's hiding amongst the baggage, to say, we'd like another one. But because he looked good, they said, long live the king. And so for you got to ask yourself as you look at your life, are there things that look good that aren't good? Are there elements of my life? Are there people that I'm putting myself around? Are there circumstances that I am pursuing just because it makes me look good? But the text shows us that when we do that, that's foolish and the results will be tragic. And then finally, the whole issue. We go back to 1 Samuel chapter 8. If we consider all of these things, really the main issue is this. And it's, have I forgotten the good things that God has done for me? That if the people would have done a better job of just remembering, I don't think they would have asked for a king. Or I think they would have been willing to wait for the right one. They forgot. They forgot about his deliverance. They forgot about Egypt. They forgot about all the things that he had done for them as they took over land. They forgot. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what's happening in your life. I have no idea. But I wonder, are you so blinded by troubling circumstances that you have forgotten the good things that God has done for you in the past? And if you forget those things, you, like the people of Israel, you will quickly abandon the giver in pursuit of the gift. For some of you, maybe life's good. And I would just say, okay, if it's good and things are going well for you, then my question would be like, do you realize why? Do you realize, as the Bible says, is that every good and perfect gift is from above? So the good things that are there, the things that you're enjoying, the things that you're celebrating, they are only yours because he has put them your way. Now, some people hear that and they say, good things God has done for me. You don't know my life, Ryan. God hasn't done anything for me. Or even if you knew my last 2 years or everything that I've gone through, Ryan, you would never say that he's done nothing for me. And to that I would say there will come a moment in history where only one thing will matter, and that will be what Jesus did for us on the cross. And as we look at that moment, and when we experience that moment in history, no one is going to look back on their life and say, God hasn't done anything good for me. Everyone is going to look at their lives and say, I can't believe God did that for me. That we will all be struck at what was done for us in the gospel. And when you think of the gospel, it's the most beautiful thing ever. Jesus paid the bill and you get all the benefits. That Jesus came. That Jesus lived. That Jesus died. Jesus rose. But God forgives you. He did all the work. And when we fail to realize the good things that He's done in our past, it's probably because we haven't done a good job of letting the truth of the gospel wash over our souls. Because when we do, there's nothing that we can say other than, man, I can't believe He did that for me. Would you pray with me this morning? Heavenly Father, we love You. And God, we thank You that we can come to You, that we can know You. Not only can we know You, but we're known by You. And as we sit here and we're online watching this, and as we're doing all the things that we're doing right now, I just pray that You'd help us to evaluate these 3 questions. God, help us to see things like You see. I pray that we would not be deceived by externals. And if that's the case, would You show us that? Would You show us that and help us to know to change? Father, I also I pray, God, that You would help us to consider our lives. Are there things where You have asked us to do something and we're not doing that thing that You're asking? Pray in love, pray You'd convict us of that right now. That You'd make us aware of the realities of the things that we're supposed to do. Help us, God, not to be like Saul. And then finally, Father, I pray, let us not forget Your goodness. God, remind us of the truth of the gospel. And I just pray that if there's anyone here, anybody watching, who doesn't know You, I pray they would put their faith in You. That they put their faith in all that You've done for them. And that it would transform them so radically, God, that they would be a new person. They'd be born again. That You would forgive them of their sins, and that, God, that You would give them a new heart. God, we love You and we trust You. We just pray that You'd help us be more like You. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for watching us on YouTube today. We hope that the content that you heard helped you know Jesus better.
Also, don't forget to click subscribe and to click the bell icon so that you'll get notified every time our channel drops a new video.
If you would like to partner with us in what God is doing here at New Life, there are 3 ways that you can give.
You can give by mailing a check to the church. You can give by going to giving.nlspringfield.com, or you can text 84321 with the amount that you'd like to give.
And if you would like to connect with us in any other way, you can visit us at nlspringfield.com, click on the Connect tab, and we will get back to you as soon as we can.
See you next week.